The ledger is open on the conference table, and no one in the room is speaking. It's a Tuesday in November, and the fluorescent lights in the county attorney's office are the kind that hum at a frequency you feel behind your eyes. My cousin Renata has her hand pressed flat against her sternum, like she's trying to keep something inside. My uncle Debrescu is looking at the window. Not through it. At it. My Aunt Margit has her mouth open, but whatever she rehearsed on the drive over has gone somewhere she can't reach it. The ledger is from a green metal box. The kind of box you could buy at any hardware store for $12. Grandma Velianu kept it under the loose floorboard in her sewing room, beneath a stack of fabric she'd been saving since 1987. The attorney slides one page across the table, then another. The number at the bottom of the third page is $128,400. No one touches the pages. Nobody argues. That's the part one wasn't ready for. How quiet the room gets when a family story about itself finally meets the receipts. Welcome to Calm Revenge Tales, where we don't rush the truth, because the truth was never in a hurry. If you've never been here before, this channel is for people who stayed quiet too long, for overlooked people whose patience turned out to be a different kind of power. Subscribe before we go further. You're going to want to be here for all of it. I am an accountant. Not a glamorous profession, and I've never pretended otherwise. I work for a mid-size logistics firm in Timișoara. I drive a 12-year-old Dacia, and I pack my own lunch every day in a blue container I've had since university. I built this life in increments. Night classes, a second job entering data at a pharmacy on weekends, a loan I paid back 18 months early because I couldn't stand the weight of it. Nobody handed me anything. I noticed fairly early that this fact made certain members of my family uncomfortable in a way they disguised as concern. My grandmother, Elena Velianu, was 81 when this story begins. She had lived in the same house in the Banat Hills for 53 years, a house she and my grandfather built themselves when cement was a luxury. She kept a vegetable garden that she referred to by the names of its sections, the Tomato Republic, the Garlic Empire. And she made a sour cherry preserve that I have never tasted its equal anywhere. She was small. She was precise. She had opinions about everything and apologized for none of them. The rest of the family saw her as a resource. I saw her as a person. I visited every other Saturday. I fixed what needed fixing. We ate whatever she'd cooked, and she talked while I listened. Those were the terms, and they were perfect. I never discussed money with her. She never asked me to. The invitation to the family gathering at my uncle Debrescu's house in the spring came through my cousin Renata, which was already a signal. Renata communicated on behalf of the family the way a bailiff serves papers, formally, without warmth, with the implication that non-compliance carried consequences. The occasion was Grandma's 82nd birthday. The message said, "Come for lunch. 2 o'clock. Bring nothing. This is a family matter. Bring nothing." I read that twice. The family had a habit of attaching small conditions to gatherings, dress codes implied, topics avoided, a general atmosphere of auditing. Bring nothing meant, arrive empty-handed and grateful. It meant, this is on our terms. I almost didn't go. But Grandma had called me the week before, and she'd said in the particular tone she used when she was asking me something without asking, "I'd like you to be there, oh Anna. I think it would be good if you were in the room." So I went. I arrived at 1:58 and found Grandma already seated at the far end of the long table in Debrescu's dining room, in a chair someone had positioned slightly away from the group, close enough to be included, far enough to be managed. She was wearing her good blue dress. Her hands were folded on the table. When she saw me come through the door, something in her shoulders changed. "You came," she said. "Of course," I said. Later, I would understand that those 2 sentences were the entire architecture of what followed. The irony I missed at the time. The invitation had said bring nothing. But Grandma had, in her purse, a small green metal box. I noticed it when she set her bag on the floor beside her chair. I thought nothing of it. She was the kind of woman who carried things. Lunch was roast pork and polenta, and it was served by Renata with the efficiency of someone performing a task they resented. The conversation moved in the way it always did in that house, around the table in a circle, with everyone directing their remarks at Dubrescu, who presided with the mild satisfaction of a man who had arranged things exactly as he preferred them. Grandma was not asked a single question for the first 40 minutes. I kept watching her. She ate slowly. She was watching the room. Then Dubrescu said, as if arriving at an agenda item, "We should talk about the property situation." The property situation. That was the phrase. It referred to the house in the Bonnot Hills, Grandma's house, which she had never once offered to anyone, but which the family had apparently been discussing as a future distribution problem for years. They had, I learned in the next 10 minutes, already consulted a real estate agent. They had already obtained an appraisal. The appraisal was passed around the table in a folder. Grandma looked at the folder when it reached her. She did not open it. Dubrescu explained that it would be simpler, at this stage of life, for Grandma to sign over the deed, voluntarily, of course, freely, naturally, so that when the time came, the estate could be settled without the complications of probate. He used the word complications 4 times. I said, "Grandma hasn't been asked what she wants." The table went still. Margit said, with a smile calibrated precisely for maximum condescension, "Ioana, you've always had very strong opinions for someone who isn't affected by this." I said, "She's sitting right here." Dubrescu said, "Ioana, your role in this family has never been to." And then Grandma put her hand flat on the table. Not loudly, just firmly. And she said, "I'd like to go home now. Ioana, will you take me?" I stood up. I helped her with her coat. Renata and Margit exchanged a look. One of the cousins on the far end, a young man named Silviu who'd never spoken directly to me in his life, opened his mouth and then closed it again. We walked out together. I framed it as a choice because it was. We didn't leave because we were expelled. We left because we had somewhere better to be. After that day, the visits stopped being every other Saturday. They became every Saturday. And then most Sundays too, if I could manage it. The logistics took some arranging. The drive from Timișoara was 2 hours each way, so I reorganized my work schedule to leave early on Fridays and come back Monday mornings. I put 1,400 Romanian lei a month toward fuel that I hadn't budgeted for. I moved my grocery shopping to the market near her village, where things were cheaper anyway, so that absorbed some of it. I didn't discuss any of this with anyone. Numbers have solutions. You find them. Grandma and I developed a routine. I arrived around noon. She would have something already on the stove, usually a bean soup in winter, a cucumber salad with dill in summer. We ate together and she told me things about her life that I had never known. How she met my grandfather at a party-organized harvest where everyone had been too afraid to talk, and how he'd made her laugh by doing a perfect impression of the regional secretary. How she'd learned to tile her own bathroom floor because the waiting list for a tradesman was 2 years, and she wasn't interested in waiting. How she'd kept a journal from 1962 to 1991, and burned it in the yard the week before the revolution, because she'd written honestly and wasn't sorry for any of it. The rest of the family made contact 4 times in the following 8 months. Dubrescu called to say that if I encouraged Grandma's stubbornness, I would regret it when the estate was settled. I told him I'd noted his concern. Margit sent a card suggesting that Grandma needed professional care, and that my weekend visits were not sufficient. Grandma read it, and put it in the recycling without comment. Renata drove out once, unannounced, in September. I was in the garden pruning the tomato republic while Grandma directed from the doorstep with a level of operational specificity that was genuinely impressive. Renata stood at the gate for a moment. Then she left without knocking. It was around this time that I first noticed the green metal box. Grandma kept it in her sewing room. on a shelf between a tin of buttons and a folded piece of fabric in a red and blue geometric pattern that I'd never seen her use. She moved it once while I was in the room, from the shelf to the sewing table, and I saw her hands go to it the way they went to things she was deciding about. I didn't ask. She didn't offer. It sat there like a sentence waiting to be finished. One afternoon in October, she made mamalaga from scratch, the real kind, stirred for 40 minutes without stopping, with a wooden paddle that had belonged to her mother. She served it with sheep's cheese and a fried egg and told me, while we ate, that the paddle had been a wedding gift, that her mother had written her name into the handle with a nail. "I want you to have it," she said. "I'm not taking your paddle," I said. "You're not taking it," she said. "I'm giving it to you. There's a difference." That was the second thing she said that I should have understood the full weight of at the time. I noticed the green metal box again that evening, when she moved it back to the shelf under the loose floorboard, with a precision that suggested she had done this many times before. If you're still with us, and I hope you are, this is the moment to subscribe to Calm Revenge Tales, because what comes next is the part that makes everything before it makes sense, and I want the rest of this story to find you. Grandma died in January. Not unexpectedly. She had a heart condition she'd managed for years with the kind of methodical discipline she applied to everything, but the specific morning of it caught me off guard in the way those mornings always do regardless of preparation. I was at the house, sleeping in the back room, and she was gone before the ambulance reached the valley. She left a will, executed through a notary in the nearest town, dated 14 months before her death. I didn't know about it. I found out when the notary called me, which was also when I found out that I'd been named the sole beneficiary of the house and everything in it. I want to say something about what happened in the following week, which was not the week of grief I needed, but the week of logistics that had to happen. Phone calls from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. A lawyer's letter from Debrescu's solicitor. A visit from Renata, who stood in the kitchen with her hands at her sides and told me that Grandma had been confused in her final years, and that the will was clearly the product of undue influence. I stood at the kitchen counter and looked at her, and thought about all the things I could have said. There were several. Some of them would have been accurate. I chose none of them. "The notary kept records," I said. "We can let the process work." When Renata left, I went to the sewing room. The loose floorboard. The green metal box. Inside, a savings passbook, a property deed, a ledger in Grandma's handwriting, and 47 receipts, each paper clipped to a corresponding withdrawal slip. I sat on the floor of the sewing room for a long time with the wooden paddle across my lap, and the box open in front of me. The ledger covered 11 years. The withdrawals were quarterly. The amounts range from 3,000 to 18,000 Romanian lei per transaction. The receipts were signed. They were signed by Debrescu. The total, in Grandma's careful hand at the bottom of the last page, the hand she used for labels on her preserve jars, for notes left on my pillow when I was a child, was 128,400 Romanian lei. Beneath the total, in the same hand, she had written, "I kept everything." I knew someone would need to know. The county attorney's office scheduled the meeting for November. A notary, an inheritance attorney, and a financial crimes investigator sat on one side of the table. Debrescu Margit, and Renata sat on the other. I sat at the head of the table because the attorney asked me to, and because the green metal box was mine to deliver. I placed it on the table when I came in. Debrescu's eyes went to it. His hands went very still. The attorney read from the ledger. He read the total. He passed the relevant pages across the table. Debrescu stood up. He said that the money had been loans, that everything had been agreed upon, that Grandma had been clear-eyed and willing. His voice had the quality of something that had been prepared for a different room. Margit began to cry. The crying was fluid and immediate in the way that performance can be, but it was Renata who I watched, because Renata, halfway through the second page, went pale in a way that wasn't performance at all. Her jaw moved and didn't produce words. Whatever she had believed about the legitimacy of what they'd done, some version of it was revising itself in real time. That was the moment of recognizable human fear that I'd been bracing for. They hadn't known she'd kept the receipts. They hadn't thought she was capable of building a case. They had looked at a small woman with a sewing room and a vegetable garden, and decided she was a resource, not a record keeper. She had known someone would need to know. The attorney asked if I had anything to add. I said, "My grandmother told me there's a difference between taking something and giving it. She said that many times in many contexts." I placed my hand on the green metal box. She gave me this. She gave it deliberately, and she gave it early enough that no one could misplace it. Then I said, "She used to say that the people who call you worthless are always counting what they plan to take from you." No one at the table spoke for a moment. The financial crimes investigation completed in March. The documented total of unauthorized withdrawals, cross-referenced against Grandma's passbook, the ledger, and the signed receipts, was confirmed at 128,400 Romanian lei. Dubrescu reached a civil settlement rather than face criminal proceedings. Full restitution, paid in structured installments, secured against property. Margit was not named in the civil action. Renata had cooperated with the investigation. The attorney told me that without my acknowledging it, as information rather than a request. I was asked, once, whether I wanted to pursue criminal charges for elder financial abuse. I sat with that question for 2 days. Then I sent a letter to Dubrescu's solicitor that said, "If restitution proceeds on schedule, I will not escalate." That was the offer of mercy. It was refused, not in words, but in the first missed payment, 6 weeks later. After that, I had no further decisions to make. The attorney did his work. The courts did theirs. Dubrescu sold a parcel of land. The installments resumed. Margit sent me a card in April. She said she hoped the family could one day mend. I did not reply, but I didn't throw it away either. I put it in a tin, which is a habit I seem to have inherited. Renata called once. She asked how I was. I told her I was well. She said she was sorry. I told her I believed her. Neither of us said anything after that for a long time. And then she said goodbye. The restitution went to the estate, which I was sole beneficiary of. I used a portion of it to restore the roof of the house in the hills. I planted the tomato republic again in May, in the same positions Grandma had mapped out with stakes and string. I learned her sour cherry preserve recipe from a card she'd left in the kitchen drawer, and I made my first batch in late June. 11 jars, slightly too sweet, because I mistimed the sugar, but close. I drive out every Saturday. The road through the valley in early morning is a specific shade of gray-green that doesn't have a name I know, and the house is exactly as she left it, except that the wooden paddle hangs on a hook by the stove where I can see it while I cook. My grandmother's name was Elena. She kept every receipt. She called me by name when she wanted me in the room. That was never nothing. It was everything. If someone came to mind while you were listening, someone quiet, someone patient, someone the room talks around instead of to, don't let the week get away from you before you call them. Today. Not this weekend. Today. Share this story if you think someone needs to hear it. Leave a comment with what you took from it, and subscribe if you want to be here the next time the receipts tell the story the family didn't expect. I'll see you in the next one.